All right, I'm letting people in. It's 11:59. Letting people in. All right, it's noon. My name is Jessica Russell. I'm with the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and I'm so happy to welcome you to Welty at Home. Today we're discussing the winds with Dr. Suzanne Marrs. And if you want to participate in the discussion with your question or comment, be sure to click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and click the raise hand button. And that way, Dr. Marrs and I will know to be looking for your hand. I also kind of keep an eye on the chat. There's usually more going on there than we have time to talk about. So don't miss that. But if there's every now and then, I'll tell you what's going on there. We're so glad to have you today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Suzanne Marrs to start our discussion.
Well, I'm going to start off with just a little background information. Then I know we'll have a lively discussion, and I'll try not to talk too much after that. First, I want to start with a quotation from Elizabeth Bowen about fiction. And she says this: "The apparent choices of art are nothing but addictions, predispositions. Where did these come from? How were they formed? The aesthetic is nothing but a return to images that will allow nothing to take their place. All susceptibility belongs to the age of magic, the Eden where fact and fiction were the same. The imaginative writer was the imaginative child." So here is a story about childhood. And in fact, this imaginative child, when she goes out and looks for the fairies in the morning, and her parents call her back, says they called her back, or she thinks this, they called her back because they had no memory of magic. But Eudora clearly had a memory of magic from her childhood. And Jessica and Rachel and I were talking about our own memories of magical childhoods. And so we have that evoked here, I think. The narrator in the story is a third person narrator, but that third person narrator is centered on Josie. I think we all notice that a lot of times the language would be too sophisticated, probably for a 10 or 12-year-old girl, but then it's not her language that we're hearing her thoughts, and those thoughts are ones that are felt, but the child might not have the ability to express. And at other times we do have Josie's language coming into play through the free and direct discourse. Josie is to a considerable extent, I think, young Eudora Welty. She's certainly based on young Eudora Welty. And I have written about this. Now I thought I had all my books at hand. Here we are. And so here's what I've written about it. Young Josie, the protagonist of The Winds, lives in a house much like the Welty house on North Congress Street in Jackson, and the storm with which the story begins derives from a storm Welty herself had survived. As she wrote her story, Welty remembered the tension this storm occasioned between her parents. Her mother, who as a girl in West Virginia had loved a storm, thought it foolish to rouse the children in the middle of the night. Her father, who was always a cautious individual, thought it a necessary precaution. Welty also remembered thinking that the nighttime sounds of the storm were made by revelers outside her house. Josie's memories during the storm are Welty's own. Daisy the cow, the surprise appearance of an organ grinder, the princess bicycle, the children in the disreputable house across the street, the picture of a young girl in the May Festival, walks through Smith Park, a man who cries, "The time flies, the time flies," rides in the pony cart, the teacher running to catch snowflakes on her cape. All are the more than 20-year-old memories that Welty transformed through the metaphor of plot. So, and then we have Pearl McHaney to thank for this book, for many reasons, for this book, which is called Occasions. but Occasions has in it a little essay called Jackson, a Neighborhood, which the Junior League published in a book called Jackson Landmarks. And in this book, Eudora recalls the Red Path Chautauqua. The Red Path was the traveling Chautauqua as opposed to the one established in upstate New York. The Red Path Chautauqua coming to town. Once a year and another part of summer, live entertainment came with the Red Path Chautauqua. The tent went up on a vacant lot somewhere near West Capitol Street Methodist Church. My father always took tickets for the full week's performances. This meant we could ride on the streetcar at night, which only began the excitement, holding on to wicker seats by open windows and smelling the scorching rails as we made what seemed a sizzling speed through the calm of nighttime Jackson. Where will you spend eternity was even then a landmark sign looking down from under a light bulb onto the IC station from just beyond Mr. Tripp's furniture store. Within the Chautauqua tent, the smells of newest sawdust and oldest canvas, plank benches down front for the children to sit together on, stage with green rep curtains fastened together in front, while you waited with your heart in your throat for them to be rattled back. Until then, you could only keep reading over and over the hopeful sign that hung on a tent pole, Kimball's piano used. The show might be an educational lecture on a distant part of the world, or a concert by a musical trio, generally all ladies, or the performance of a play such as Turn to the Right, or more blessedly, The Bat. On the final night, a play was performed one year with a cast of local children. We were encouraged to try out. I did, for a role that where all you did in tryouts was sit with your ankles crossed in a folding chair in the middle of the stage with all the others around you and singing to you. It didn't appear that there were even any lines to speak. Another girl with naturally curly hair beat me to the part. Imagine my surprise when on the night this character turned out to be Joan of Arc. And what was she doing at center stage? And what she was doing at center stage was being burned at the stake. The rest sang to her. This was during World War I. Joan of Arc, may your spirit guide us through. Allons, enfants de patrie. Joan of Arc, we're for you. I'd had a close call. I feel we were highly entertained as children and quite well versed in ways of entertaining ourselves. Our play was unscheduled, unorganized, and incessant in our backyards, our friends' backyards, in the public parks, and especially in summertime, we ran free. Our mothers, however, knew right where we were. At the same time, it seemed to me we read all day. We might read all night, and we might read all day in a tree. Summer nights we played out. We made choo-choo boats, steamboats out of shoeboxes with windows in the shape of the moon and stars cut out of the sides and tissue paper pasted over and a candle inside lighted to show through. And at first dark, down the river of sidewalk, pulling our shiny boats on a string, we met other boats and passed each other. Choo-choo, choo-choo. So all of those details, and even the reference to Joan of Arc comes up, although Eudora doesn't tell about her good luck in not being burned at the stake in this story. So we have these autobiographical details. One other bit of background information. An earlier version of this story written in the 1930s was called Beautiful Ohio. Beautiful Ohio is entirely set in the present. It lacks the memories and the flashbacks that are in this story, and it's just about the trip to the Chautauqua. Okay, so let's talk about the story. And I thought we might start off by talking for just a bit about the opening section of the story, the present time of the story, the present action, before we get to the memory flashbacks with Will and Josie. And you'll notice that this story is not called Beautiful Ohio or My Trip to the Chautauqua or anything like that. It's called The Winds. So why don't we talk about why the winds? Because the winds are the focus at this first part of the story. Anyone want to start us off? Want to help me? Why the winds? Why this focus on the winds? We can start somewhere else if you don't like this question. Harriet and Beverly.
So I could talk the long way around to get to the winds. I want to say, that I've been really in the body of the other woman. That is my book on Welty's fiction and photography. I'm really interested in Welty's a pattern in Welty's autobiographical stories, where there's often a daughter who needs to escape protection, female protection. And those fictions often pair, or they always pair, a middle-class daughter with another character. That's the central consciousness character who is fascinated by another girl or woman who is less protected, who may be other class, who is more comfortable because less protected with female exposure and with daring. And I'm thinking about the winds now in terms of our opening with Josie thinking about the hayride in Lover's Lane, and thinking about a plot that is potentially a conventional romance plot that is not the one that Welty's going to write, but that she's moving into adolescence. She's in a stormy change that is echoed in this equinoctial storm, change of seasons. And I'm thinking about her dad, who says, there was once a little girl who was swept away from her father out into a hayfield, and how that ties in both with the opening thoughts about the hayride on Lover's Lane and the idea of female protection, because he takes her up in the storm and he says, "Don't be afraid," which is not really a feeling that we see in her thoughts.
I think that's exactly right. And so here you've got the big girls. The big girls are out on the hayride, and all of us who have been little girls remember talking about the big girls. And so here she's fascinated with them and the sounds of their voices. And then there's the father thinking, well, once a man's daughter blew away from him, and she's about to blow away from her family here too, figuratively, if not literally. And then there's Cornella that she sees out in the storm, and her father says, "Oh, impossible, Josie, forget it." But there is Cornella, the other class, older girl, the big girl, out in the storm and associated with the storm and with the freedom to be out there. And Josie is called back, as she often is, being called back away from the window. Beverly.
Well, I thought in sort of the same terms Harriet was thinking about the title in terms of the equinox. Mm-hmm. As this is we're in the fall equinox, I suppose, because her mother says it's the end of summer. This is the end of summer, but it's also Josie's equinox. If she's 10 or 12, she's on the verge of, if not womanhood, at least moving into puberty and beginning to want to have a little more freedom from her family. Mm-hmm. So as the winds are coming through and they're bringing all of these emotions and all of these thoughts, some of them almost like stream of consciousness, mm-hmm. as she goes through. I think it's signaling the change to Josie, and not only seasonal change, but also other changes as well.
Yeah, these are the winds of change, and focusing on that equinoctial storm and putting that at the center of the story, focusing our attention with the title. I'm horrible at titles. This is the perfect title. I might never have come up with it. All right, Jacob.
I agree with everything said. I just wanted to add what I thought was a really clever, beautiful flourish from Welty. This story's called The Winds, right? W-I-N-D-S. What's the last line? Not the W-I-N-D-S, but the W-H-E-N, the winds.
Yeah.
So the winds of change. When is it going to happen to me? And then we hear her at the very end, nothing but wind.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move away. Let's talk about the body of the story, the big middle of the story, where we do have all of these memories. And as Beverly says, these the stream of consciousness called back to the present by her father or her mother, but then again fading into the past, into memory. What memories here seem important to you before we get to the Chautauqua? We definitely want to talk about the Chautauqua, but what other memories seem crucial here to you? And is the fact that this story goes in and out of memory, what about that? How does that strike you? This puzzled people at first, I think. Any comments about that? Let me take up one. Let's take up this one on page 259, 258 and 259. She and a friend, her best friend, go out and they go to the drugstore, and then they walk back through what is, Eudora would have walked through, a Smith Park. And Smith Park is not, today is not what Smith Park was. And so the park described here is very much like the Smith Park of the past. And so we get this description. Let me see, what page did I say? Yeah, 258 and 259. Which is not right. It's 259 and 260. They ran through the park and drank from the fountain. Moving slowly as sunlight over the grass were the broad and dusty backs of pigeons. They stopped and made a clover chain and hung it on a statue. They groveled in the dirt under the bandstand, hunting for lost money. But when they found a dead bird with its feathers cool as rain, they ran out in the sun. Old Biddy Felix came to make a speech. He stood up and shouted with no one to listen. The time flies, the time flies. And his arm and hand flew like a bat in the ragged sleeve. Walking the seesaw, she held her breath for him. They floated magnolia leaves in the horse trough, themselves taking the part of the wind and waves, and suddenly remembering who they were. They closed in upon the hot tamale man, fixing their frightened eyes on his lantern and on his scars. So she's remembering this during the night. What about that memory stands out to you? Why include it? What does it tell us about Josie and about this night and about the
Dr.
winds
Marrs,
of change? Yeah.
while people are thinking about what their response is, I can go ahead if you want me to and share that photograph.
All right.
Of the
Yeah.
girls at the fountain.
Well, this photograph, I think, was actually taken in New Orleans, but it's evocative of the.
This is from Eudora Welty's photographs, and it's plate number 54 of girls at a fountain, if you can see my
See
screen.
the girls at the fountain having a little sip of water. Okay, Joe Ellen, how about you?
We're talking about dead center in the story, often potent places. And the section that you've just directed us to is really the second section where she's dealing with the summer, and it's a darker section.
Yes.
Where they see the tamale man, the dragon, and that kind of thing. But it's couched between two bits of recognition. So in the process of Josie's developing cognition from felt experience to perhaps more conscious, she at the bottom, or 2/3 of the way down page 258, she recognizes that all that she ran after in the whole summer world came to life in departure before her eyes, covered her vision with wings. It kept her from eating her dinner, et cetera, et cetera. Then she's drifted off again, and her father wakes her up. There's that really teeny section. And then at the end of the section you've directed us to on page 261, we have her, it says, for some reason, she turned toward Cornella and she understands that Cornella is waiting as if in pride. And she's called in too, the same way that Josie has been called back by her parents later. And there's a kind of, that's when Cornella has to go in, she sees her bows sinking down in her back. They're drooping, so that there's something very different than the first segment on the summer, where we got the monkey man and all of this stuff, and there's a different tone. So there's something
The
that's
fairy
happening.
riding her princess bicycle.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and all of that. And then this is dark, yeah. What about the specific images here? And why this bit of darkness at this moment? It's really paired with with all those insects that she wants to catch and that fly free, and she wants to watch the lightning bugs and the June bug on a string so it can fly, and and then we have these images here. So specifically, they crawl under the dirt under the bandstand. Monica, I'll let you go first.
Well, I love, now that you've called our attention to this section, this I was thinking, first of all, that so much of this is about memory, and not just memory, but remembering who you are, that like waking up from a dream and not being sure who you are at first. And here you get them suddenly remembering who they are right after they, like, the two girls become part of the storm themselves. Right, they're playing in the water themselves, taking the part of the wind and the waves, and suddenly remembering who they are. So it's kind of like a microcosm of the story happens in this description.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So that they're the ones blowing on the little the leaves in the horse trough. Yeah. What other images here? They groveled in the dirt under the bandstand hunting for lost money, but when they found a dead bird with its feathers cool as rain, they ran out in the sun. Old Biddy Felix came to make a speech. He stood up and shouted with no one to listen, the time flies, and his arms and hand flew like a bat in the ragged sleeve. Cheryl and Beverly and Harriet.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I really hadn't thought of the winds in connection with like a change or metamorphosis. I was really thinking about the story in reference to time and being in a present moment, but also feeling past and future moments. So the time flies. It's just like the winds of change, but like the times of change. And it was really, for me, more of a, so that's why I like that particular line, is because of the time aspect of it.
Yeah. So one thing about she's coming to terms with is the urgency of time, isn't it? The possibilities of daring, the possibilities of breaking free, but also the urgency to do it. And I think also the danger of doing it, you know, all of those. Yeah. Beverly and then Harriet.
I think too, you have the juxtaposition of the lighter things that she and, you know, remembers from summer, those memories. And then we move into this darker, going under the bands. I mean, who knows what's going to be under there? And seeing the tamale man with his scars, and, you know, having grown up in a time when you did play out at night in the summertime, and you wanted to push the limits a little bit. You know, it was very different from playing out in the daytime, you know, where you might go into some, you know, strange person's backyard and see what was, you know, when they weren't there to see what you were doing. So I think, again, this goes with her sort of rite of passage as she is pushing the envelope and exploring and experiencing. And of course, she's got Cornella over there across the street, who's also beckoning her, I think, in a way to push her, or at least push her consciousness into the fact that, as you said, time is passing and things are changing. And she's given us a little bit of herself when probably her mother would not have approved of some of those things she was doing in the darker section.
Yeah. And I think also old Biddy Felix, who says the time flies, obviously is compromised, mentally compromised. Here is the, what time can do to you as well. I mean, here, and then the scars on the tamale man. But the urgency then to act, that the moment may never come again. And Cornella is ahead of her. I'll never catch up, but she's moving towards catching up here, I think, with these kinds of recognitions. Harriet and Monica.
Maybe this is just underlining what we're already saying, which is in the context of a daughter's escape or protection, there's some need to figure out the nature of the world you're escaping into, and whether the warnings that you're being given are valid or not. I mean, I think about a story we'll be reading later at the landing, that there's this same tension between escaping protection and whether or not there is danger that the central character both wants to experience and also has to face the reality of. So I'm thinking about the darkness of this section in that way.
Good. Monica?
Well, talking about this theme of time passing and also the theme of mothers and daughters, reading it this time, I was so struck with how much this resonates with To the Lighthouse. On page 257, you even get the perspective of the house, and watching it all from the beginning, the morning going by was the double house. So there's this great resonance of how we understand time and memory. And one way of doing that is getting the perspective of the non-human things. That was just so gorgeous in this reading to me.
I love that. And there's also talking about their own house. They were one with the house, she says at one point. Jacob.
I agree with Monica. I also thought it reminded me of Proust. I mean, this is high modernism. This is a very ambitiously complex story about time out of order, the complexity of memory. I mean, this is a woman that's often depicted as a sheltered middle-class writer from the South, the anti-modernist South. And this is high modernism to the max of Virginia Woolf, Proust. Very impressive. And 15 pages.
Sarah. Thank you, Jacob.
Is my mic working?
Yes.
Okay, great. I love all the comments. I'm also thinking, Suzanne, at how many removes or distances there are in the story, that by the time we get to the dark passage that you read for us, where, there's this, to me, rather gothic character saying the time flies. That's in a dream, in a storm, told by the free and direct discourse of a narrator. We have all of these things that kind of provide shells around that danger in the middle. So I'm really interested in how it's enveloped in all these layers.
Thank you, Sarah. Shall we look at the, is it too soon, do you think, to look at the memory of the Chautauqua? Shall we look at that? And talk about that. We can go back if you want to, but let's look on 265 in the Library of America. So Mrs. Welty, by the way, played the cornet. Mrs. Welty ran in storms. And so here she's part of the, force that the character Josie, she's inspired the mother that Josie is rebelling against. But in some ways, Eudora's mother was that emblem of daring. So here we go. If morning glories had come out of the horn instead of those sounds, Josie would not have felt a more astonished delight. She was pierced with pleasure. The sounds were so tremulously The sounds that so tremulously came from the striving of the lips were welcome and sweet to her. Between herself and the lifted cornet, there was no barrier. There was only the stale, expectant air of the old shelter of the tent. The cornetist was beautiful. There in the flame-like glare that was somehow shadowy, she had come from far away, and the long times of the world seemed to be about her. She was draped heavily in white, shaded with blue, like a queen, and she stood braced and looking upward like the figurehead on a Viking ship. As the song drew out, Josie could see the slow appearance of a little vein in her cheek. Her closed eyelids seemed almost to whir, and yet to rest motionless like the wings of a hummingbird when she reached the high note. The breaths she took were fearful, and a little medallion of some kind lifted each time on her breast. Josie listened in mounting care and suspense, as if the performance led in some direction away, as if a destination were being shown her. And there, not far away, with her face all wild, was Cornella, listening too, and still alone. In some alertness, Josie turned and looked back for her parents, but they were far back in the crowd. They did not see her. They were not listening. She was let free. And turning back to the cornetist, who was transfixed beneath her instrument, she bent gently forward and closed her hands together over her knees. "Josie," whispered Will, prodding her, "that's my name." But she would not talk to him. She had come home tired in a dream, but after the light had been turned out on the sleeping porch and the kisses of her family were put on her cheek, she had not fallen asleep. She could see from the high porch that the town was dark, except where beyond the farthest rim of trees, the old cottonseed mill with its fiery smokestack and its lights forever seemed an inland boat that waited for the return of the sea. It came over her how the beauty of the world had come with its sign and stridden through their town that night, and it seemed to her that a proclamation had been made in the last high note of the lady trumpeter when her face had become set in its passion, and that after that there would be no more waiting and no more time left for the one who did not take heed and follow. Okay, so what about that memory? Here's this memory is the one, the closest memory, but it comes to her at last. Yeah, Joellen and Harriet.
I want to point out up front that that very night, it seems that they were at the Chautauqua earlier that evening. I've seen a lot of commentary that suggests otherwise, that this was also in the past, but I think it's really important that we understand this was the crucial thing that happened to her just before the storm. And so her processing through the night is in stages, and how she sees Cornella. It seems to move from sensed or felt experiences through gradually more cognition, recognizing things, finally to articulation. So we really have, as Jacob said, in the course of 17 pages or so, I think a Künstlerroman, the education of an artist, because she moves toward articulation and following. I love that movement. But here, anyway, just that everything, I haven't yet really gone back and reread everything with that in mind, that her subconscious and then consciousness is working through what really spurred her that night.
I think you're exactly right. This is the same night. It's that very night. And it's something that she hasn't fully understood. And it's only after these memories, other memories, that she can go back and face what happened to me tonight and how was it important to me. Yeah, Harriet.
So I think about the double house in the story, introducing the idea of doubles. And we have these doubles that are Cornella and the cornetist, and this sense of the excitement of both of these other women, and I'm thinking about her moving from recognizing the cornetist as this woman in white who who is the artist, the performer, who dares a kind of passion in her music that Josie recognizes, thinking back to Cornella, who is there, excited, responding, while Josie's parents are far away and she's free. I'm thinking too about the question of reading the story, which is sometimes the Cornella and Cornetist are read as different choices that Josie could take. That one is towards a kind of female sexuality that Cornella represents, and the other is the artist. But I think that they are doubles, and that the sound repetition in those words, originally in Beautiful Ohio, it was the trumpeter, and she's changed her to the cornetist. I'm thinking about, I was thinking too about what you were saying about Eudora's mother. I mean, I think that Eudora's mother is both a unconventional woman who is daring and who is concerned for her daughter facing the same kinds of upsets that kind of female daring can cause, and that maybe in her relationship, in her mother's relationship, there's a protectiveness that isn't in her own personality.
When we talk about the end of the story, I want to argue that Cornella and the cornetist are different ways. That final image, but I'll save it for them. Yeah.
We'll agree to disagree.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. We had done that before. Anything else about this scene here at the Chautauqua? What about? I think that the whole business of the artist is really important, isn't it? That here is and of course you recognize that this is at the Red Path Chautauqua and these women are in these costumes and it's probably kind of a hokey thing, but the impact upon Josie is that she sees a character who's performing with passion, who's giving her all for her art. And we've seen that image before in stories like Powerhouse, who gives his all for his art. And so we have that notion of the artist, I think, coming in here. Yeah, Joellen?
We're talking about gender roles and mothers, but I'd like to talk about the men for a minute. Every time Will wakes up, he's yelling, "I'll kill you with my gun," like a quotes, wild Indian, etc. And the father early on is always pulling her back, being safe, maybe slightly arguing something, but at the very end, just at the beginning, or just before the beginning of that last section, 2/3 of the way down to page 264, when she wants muff, it's like those snowflakes have prompted memories of winter and seeing snow, and she wants to be protected or warm from that perhaps. And her mother says, "I want my little muff." She ached for it. "Keep still," said her mother softly. There's a kind of reversal here. Her father came over and kissed her. And as if a new kiss could bring a memory, she remembered the night. That suggests that's what prompts this, that it's safe to remember the night, that there's a kind of permission from her father. And that's how I read Dirty Dancing in its popularity. That's a real stretch to mention that here, but a father's kind of permission in that case of sexuality, but here a kind of permission to remember.
Well, and coming from the sheltered, protected life, it's safe then to take risk, huh? So that you don't risk losing the love of the father. You can take risk, whatever. Yeah. And Jacob?
I think I'd add a comment on Will and there are a couple mentions throughout of the picture show, his knowledge of maybe movie Westerns. Could you give me a sense, Susanna, when this story might be set? If you
I think it's set in 1917 or 1918 because it's World War I is going on and there are flags on the stage for the war. Yeah.
I just think it's an acute historical portrait of, if I said this is a modernist story, I think it's also about how the technologies of the 20th century are encroaching on these children. The winds of change are occurring historically. Movies are coming into town. No wonder Josie thinks like this. This is how movies operate,
Yeah.
you know, scene by scene, cut from one scene to another, move through time. We even hear mentions of the choo-choo, right? Trains. The Chautauqua is a kind of pre-cinematic technology. So these children, though it's a coming of age story, most certainly, but in a way you're hearing modern America going through a coming of age moment.
Yeah.
Everything is pregnant with change.
Helen, thank you. Yeah, I agree. Helen. We can't hear you yet, Helen. Not yet. Let me get Cheryl and you see if you can figure it out.
I think I've got
There
it
you
now.
go. Okay, good. Go
Okay.
ahead.
There, when we're talking about the picture show, we read about that. There's also a significant moment there when she gets the blurred image of herself,
Mm-hmm.
and for the first time seems to be aware of how others might perceive her while she's in her thoughts, or that she's a person that is not just totally whole in herself, that she's got a total abandonment on her face, but people can see that, and she had not thought of herself in that way before. This seems also a part of coming of age.
Yes, yes. That moment of revelation, of exposure.
Yes, and it's
Cheryl.
blurred. Yes.
Yeah, blurred. Cheryl.
I'm here.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so I'm excited to finally talk about Will. And every time Eudora referenced, well, when she described him, so she said that his hands were in small fists, or that he stood straight up, erect, like a spinning top. That he had fur rugs with paws, head, and tail that
Mhm.
Josie noticed. Oh, and I like he says when he kind of wakes up and he says, "Show me their tracks, just show
Yeah.
me their tracks." And so I'm noticing like this connectedness between these stories, and like intersections of past, present, and future. And Will keeps referencing like natural things and manifest destiny and conquering like new territory, which reminds me of the first story. And then the cornetist woman at Chautauqua playing reminded me of Blasser Hassids, or whatever his name was, his cousin wife, and how she played and had the young deaf boy like totally transfixed.
Yeah, I think of Will too, don't you, as not having the kind of constraints that are put on Josie, that he is more daring in a
I
way.
hadn't thought of that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So it's the sort of gender roles. Yeah. Shall we look at the end? But as I see we're getting down in time, let's look at the ending, which is back in present time. The next morning, but first the night and then the morning. But that's so they come back into the present time. There was a breaking sound, the first thunder. "You see," said her father. He struck his palms together and it thundered again. "It's over. Back to bed, every last one of you," said her mother, as if she had been done, as if all had been done, as if it had all been done. If I'm going to read it correctly eventually. As if it had all been something done to tease her. And now her defiance had won. She turned the light off, on and off. "Pow!" cried Will, and then toppled into his father's arms and was carried up the stairs. From then on, there was only the calm, steady falling of rain. Josie was placed in her wintertime bed. They would think her asleep, for they had all kissed one another in a kind of triumph to do for the rest of the night. The rain was a sleeper's sound. She listened for a time to a tapping that came at her window like a plea from outside. From whom? She could not know. Cornella, Sweet Summertime, The Little Black Monkey, Poor Biddy Felix, A Lady with the Horn Whose Lips Were Parted, had they after all asked something of her? There outside was all that was wild and beloved and estranged, and all that would beckon and leave her, and all that was beautiful. She wanted to follow, and by some metamorphosis, she would take them in, all, every one. I'll stop there, and then I want to read the last part too. But so here is, as soon as the storm is over and they put her back to bed, we're back in the present time, and here is her interpretation of what's happened to her. What are we to make of this, do you think? I want to read one line to you from Eudora Welty herself, who has said, "I never doubted that imagining yourself into other people's lives is exactly what writing fiction is." And then she went on to say, "The emotions in which all of us are alike involved for life differ more in degree than in kind." I never doubted that imagining yourself into other people's lives is exactly what writing fiction is. And is Josie thinking like a fiction writer here? Is this the key moment where she says, Cornella, Sweet Summertime, The Little Black Monkey, Poor Biddy Felix, A Lady with the Horn Whose Lips Were Parted, had they after all asked something of her? There outside was all that was wild and beloved and estranged, and all that would beckon and leave her, and all that was beautiful. Yeah. What about that? Speaks for itself. Harriet?
So you got me thinking about my favorite passage in Welty and Moon Lake, where it's about the other way.
Thinking of it too. Yeah.
Yeah, the other way to be, and to be Gertrude, to be
Susie, to be a boy.
Boy, the orphan, and that readiness to imagine your way out of yourself in a way that expands yourself. I'm thinking too about the passage the knocking, as I think forward to June recital and the knocking that Cassie hears, which is I think of as Yeats' Wandering Angus out there inviting her out, but that invitation to be out of yourself, into the world, into the other.
I think Welty's concept of fiction is that it is an expansion of self. And I think a lot of writers think of it as a kind of just more of a sort of plumbing of the depths of the self. But I think she sees it in terms of expanding the self, of expanding experience. Let's look at the last, shall we look at the last? Sarah first.
Oh, I hate to say this, and yet, Harriet, she's still inside. It says everything wild and beautiful is outside. And even though, and there's a nice conversation going in the chat about barriers, even though when she listens to the music, she said there was not a barrier, I still see that page and this page full of barriers between Josie and Cornella and the music and the outside and the wild and the beautiful. And so I think there's a longing to be out, longing to connect with that, but I don't think Josie's there. I think Josie is still inside. She is still Cassie inside, listening to music outside. She's still Dabney inside, thinking about the moonlight outside. She's still Clyde stuck inside the house.
She's still inside. She's still 9 years old.
Yeah. So I wouldn't disagree with that.
So there is time. It's what would come. I think time is going to fly there. So this is from the perspective of the 9 or the 10-year-old or the 12-year-old. Yeah.
Although I would have to say that this is a plot that Welty returns to again and again, which to me suggests, again, the anxiety of moving into the position of self-exposure, daring, that there is, it's a battle that she repeats giving herself permission again and again in these fictions that do that, that take the sheltered girl somewhere else. I'd also say that the sheltered quality is, I think it's important to underline that Cornella will never have the freedoms that Josie may have, having been sheltered, that there is something that Cornella's, that other classness. I mean, she may be brushing her hair in public in a way that suggests a comfort with self-exposure that Josie is anxious about, but that sheltered quality is maybe something that's needed to become the adventurous artist. So I'm on both sides of that discussion.
And I think also to know that you're absolutely loved, that you're absolutely cherished, that there's nothing you can do to change that is liberating, even if those people are trying to protect you.
Right.
No, you know that you're not going to do anything to jeopardize it. You can't. You know, so there's that sense of. Sarah?
Okay, thank you, Suzanne, for that last comment. That helps me understand all those layers I was trying to figure out earlier. Why is the memory in a dream, in the storm? Why do we have all those layers? I think that protective layer of her mother holding her, it's in a dream, it is a memory, allows her to go to a place that might be a little scary. So I love your sense that knowing you're loved allows you to do that, along with Harriet's sense that shelter may give you some freedom too. That's very helpful.
Let's look at the last lines of the story and when she finds the note and see what you make of that. So there at Josie's foot on the porch was something. It was a folded bit of paper, wet and pale and thin, trembling in the air and clinging to the pedestal of the column, as though this were the residue of some great wave that had rolled upon the rock and then receded for another time. It was a fragment of a letter. It was written not properly in ink, but in indelible pencil, and so its message had not been washed away as it might have been. Josie knelt down and took the paper in both hands, and without moving, read all that was there. Then she went to her room and put it into her most secret place, the little drawstring bag that held her dancing shoes. The name Cornella was on it, and it said, "Oh, my darling, I have waited so long. When are you coming for me? Never a day or a night goes by that I do not ask, when. So, Harriet, what I was going to say is that this is a different, what Cornella seems to be waiting for here, and that Josie is internalizing and imagining herself into Cornella's life. But what Cornella is waiting for is someone to come and take her away. But what Josie is doing, it seems to me, is internalizing or imagining her way into others' lives, not waiting for someone else to take her away. And that she put this with her dancing shoes. I mean, this girl is going to dance.
I would say about that note that it's the romance plot in fragments.
Yeah.
That's not the plot. And it is ambiguous whether this is a note to or from Cornella. Could be either. But I think it's better read as a note to and from Josie, asking the wind. I mean, that was, I think, Jacob's point about the winds, that we end the story with the winds. That is, when will we have maturity? When will we have exploration? When will we have artistic consummation? That those are the winds that's the wind of that note for Josie.
I think this is to me, this is much more likely to be Cornella writing it than anyone else, because when will you come for me? When are you coming for me? Right. The other person is not waiting for Cornella to come, I don't think. Cornella is the one waiting, but anyway.
Okay.
Jacob, yeah, Jacob.
I'd also like to go back to the beginning of the story for a second, just to say this is still a Natchez Trace story.
Yes.
And I'm gonna take just 1 second to compare this. I don't know if you guys, there's a really remarkable story by Willa Cather called a Wagner Matinee. And it's simply about a very cultured woman from the East who gets married, goes into the wilderness, goes to the plains, beautiful Ohio, call it. And she lives 30 years in the wilderness. All of that culture she once saw is gone. And at the end of the story, her some family member visits her, if I remember, and he plays something for her. He takes her to a performance, and she weeps. She weeps. This is one of the few stories that I think Welty is also drawing attention to the fact what it might feel like to be a young artist, a young girl out in the wilderness, right? Out on the old Natchez Trace, isolated from the power of the artist, and for them to come into town to quite literally blow her mind. I sensed that. I was affected by how moving that must have been historically for a little girl to witness a traveling artist come into town and transform her.
No, I think that's right, the traveling artist. Although on the other hand, I think the Natchez Trace is a symbol of liberation, of freedom, of openness, not of being cut off in the story. It's one of those. So maybe it cuts both ways, Jacobs. Beverly.
I had an observation and then a question. And when I was doing some reading on this story previously, I saw some information about Dermot Russell, who thought this was a girl's story.
Yeah.
And he sent it to Mary Lou Aswell at Harper's Bazaar because he thought it was more or less a girl's story and she would know what to do with it. And I've noticed on our Zoom today, Jacob's the only guy who said anything. And we usually have a lot of male interaction. You know, we got a lot of guys here who have wonderful ideas, but none of them have said anything. So I wondered if they consider this to be a girl's story or if it did not appeal to them in the same way that some of Welty's other stories are.
I'm going to call on John, but
right.
First, let me say that Jessica has got something she was going to show us, and that is a big, Eudora has on her wall in her house a framed fan letter for the winds, and it is from Joseph Cornell. Joseph Cornell didn't find it to be a girl's story, but I think a lot of men may. John, what do you think?
I just want to approach this as a reader, and this is responding to Beverly's question. I think this is a extraordinary story about a young woman, and who to me, it reads as though she's much older than 9 years old, who is discovering her sexuality, is going through this period of discovering her sexuality, and that's what much of the story is her dream, her coming of age dream related to her sexuality and being aware of her sexuality. Unlike the character in a still, not a still moment, but First Love, unlike the person in First Love, he's not aware of his sexuality, but he's experiencing this love for Aaron Burr. I've forgotten the character's name. But I think there's some extraordinarily, to me, and I don't know if this is a male reader or what, but there's just some extraordinarily sensuous sexual passages in the first part of the story. And then I do think there is there's this tension when she becomes focused on the future, and that part of when Josie becomes focused on the future and her recent memory that, of that, that had never occurred to me that the memory would be something that happened the very night of the storm. But whatever's been said about that, I really like that. You know, when we start thinking about the future, everything is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. We can't think into the future. We can, her first, this coming of age sequences, all those memories are, to me, what I read was that was about her summer preceding the autumnal, the autumnal equinox. And that's all of her memories about her coming of age and this extraordinary attraction she feels toward Cornelia. And
what Cornelia represents.
Yes, yeah, or what she represents. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's nothing more than what she represents. But wow, the passage about her riding on the little princess and riding on that bike, and the only thing, she doesn't touch the bike with her hands or her feet.
Right.
Just
the one place.
Yeah, just the one place. Yeah. And there's several times where she talks about her love toward Cornelia. But then again, it's that period when there's a period that to me that it says that she focuses on the future, and that's when there's this anxiety because we don't know what the future will bring. To me, that these sections are like dream sequences, not unlike what Jacob's dreams are in the Hebrew Bible. There's a coming of age dream in Genesis 28, and then there's his confrontation with Esau in Genesis 32, and he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he wrestles with God before he meets the next day with I'm talked too long.
We can come back to this next time, but let me, because we're running out of time, let's let Harriet say something and then I'll finish up.
So I was just going to say that I think that the thing that if there's anything that we didn't work on enough, I think it is sexuality. And I think that that the reason I see Cornelia and the cornetist as corresponding double models rather than opposite ones is that both sexuality and art have to do with comfort with self-exposure in the way that that Josie is working on. That is an important part of the story. That Cornelia is, she's her father says, "Forget Cornelia," and her mother says, "No." And we have her out in the street as a flasher rather than a lady.
Wearing high heels.
And brushing her hair in the sun over her face, brushing her hair in public, things that would be that suggest something that is fascinating to Josie, and something that she maybe feels anxiety about, but also adores.
Yeah, and I think there's longing to participate in the world that Cornelia is participating in. And I do think there's that real sensuous quality throughout the story. And even when she hears the music, she is pierced with pleasure. So all of that, I think, is coming into play. Well, maybe we can talk more about this next time. I wanted to show a picture, one picture, which I think is an image, one of Eudora's photographs. And we can talk about this next time because we don't really have time. But this is an image in the story where Josie imagines herself holding up wildflowers to welcome the future. To welcome the future. And if you look at the picture, here is the girl holding up wildflowers, a young girl holding up wildflowers, and she's an African American. And here in the story is Welty giving Josie the experience of this girl, and in her mind identifying the two, and I think transcending kind of racial boundaries and imagining herself into the lives of other people, so that it's this kind of embracing of experience and of others. And I would say writing during World War II as she was, she's writing about a kind of embracing vision that's the antithesis of the vision that's coming out of fascist countries. So there's my hobby horse. Jacob, last word.
Just a quick comment. Did you purposely select today, the day before the summer solstice, to tell this equinox story? That is
Maybe Lauren did, wasn't me.
excellent timing. And just wanted to congratulate you for that.
Oh, thank you all for participating. Next time we've got a ghost story,
The purple hat.
purple hat. So we will talk about that next time, and we can, John, we can come back to your comments, and I'm sorry I ended prematurely. Okay.
Okay.
See you
Bye-bye.
next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.